everybody. This is Seth Dombach here for the Phantom Galaxy podcast. Today, I've got a review for you for the new film Creep 2. Check it out. Creep 2 is the follow-up to 2014's Creep, directed by Patrick Brice and starring Brice and Mark Duplass. If you've listened to our latest episode of Underrated Halloween Picks, my first pick was Creep. This is a film that I greatly enjoy. It's a lot of fun. It's genuinely disturbing in many moments without being over the top in violence. And it's just an interesting take on the genre of found footage films. Creep 2, I was a little bit skeptical when I heard that they were doing a sequel because it would be hard to kind of follow up on that story, I felt. So it was to my genuine surprise and delight that I enjoyed Creep 2 about as much as I did for Part 1. Now, Creep 2 is going to be a departure from the tone of what made Creep 1 really good. But that's not to say it's bad in any sort of way. It's just a big tonal shift from that first film, which I think is a smart move by Duplass and Brice to change it up. So when I say that this movie is tonally different, it still manages to have some creepy moments in the film, but this one seems to be going for something a little bit more different. If I can compare this movie to other films without giving up too much away, I'm going to say that it's going to fall more in line with a movie like Man Bites Dog or The Rise of Leslie Vernon. So let me give you a little bit of a rundown about the plot of Creep 2. So Creep 2 starts off following a woman named Sarah, who started up a YouTube series where she answers ads from people on Craigslist. However, when she's done it, she's found it to not be so successful, not really living up to the potential of what she thought the series was going to be. We come to find out that the ad that was placed is by Duplass's character from the first movie. It's hard to really put down a name to his character as he kind of changes them over time. The film opens up with what seems like a continuation from Part 1, where you see what the character's been up to between Part 1 and Part 2, which is a great opening sequence of this film. And then once he meets up with Sarah, it starts kind of divulging into a different type of creep story. Now, I'm not going to really get into any spoilers in this review because part of the fun of this movie is letting it play out with knowing as little as possible about what's to come. Now, I will say off the top that there is not as much horror in this movie as there was in the first one. This one feels a little bit more kind of like a docudrama. Also, there's a lot more comedy, I'd say, in this movie as well, too. Intentional comedy. And it's also just kind of like an interesting character piece about somebody who has gone completely insane. So that's a lot of what makes this movie fun, and kind of seeing the different aspect between the first filmmaker in Part 1 and Sarah as a filmmaker in Part 2, and how those two personalities are completely different and how they interact with the main character that Duplass is playing. If you enjoyed Creep 1, I think you're going to highly enjoy Creep 2, even though it is doing something different from the first part. There's a lot of fun to be had. Duplass is excellent again in this movie. The character that he's been able to build and the way that he carries himself, it's just something that is so oft-putting in little ways. As I said, the horror is not over the top in this movie. There are little creepy moments here and there, but this is not a movie that's going to scare you. Whereas I think Part 1 has some really creepy imagery in it, and it is very scary in parts, in its own weird way. Creep 2 is not really trying to do that so much as it did in the first part. The failure of doing sequels is falling into the same format every single time. Now, while kind of the conceit of this movie is similar with the found footage and the filmmaker and things like that, it's also doing something completely different with the story that it's trying to tell here. It's interesting to see something that was so kind of a bottle film and very much its own thing, also try to expand that world that it's trying to show you. So I am interested to see where they're going to go in a Part 3 for this. I really hope that that kind of ends this series, though. Not saying that this is bad in any way. I really enjoyed this movie. But I also don't want to see, 10 Creep movies. We don't really need to explore that further unless they can come up with something that's really interesting. I kind of felt like this one could have been a good end for this series, but I will be watching it because I am interested in Duplass's career. I like almost all the stuff that he's made or stars in. I think he's a really good actor, really strong in what he does. Another movie that I will recommend during this review that's not on the spectrum of horror is a film called Blue Jay that stars Sarah Paulson and Mark Duplass. And that is an excellent, excellent film, and I highly recommend you going to check that out. So, final thoughts on Creep 2. While it falls just a little bit below the first part for me, I'm still going to give a stamp of approval to this one. I think if you enjoyed it, you're going to enjoy the second part here. There is some interesting stuff that's going on here, some good dialogue that's played off of each other, some really funny set pieces thrown throughout of it, and just an interesting film and an interesting concept to this story. If you've enjoyed this review and you want to hear more from us, please check us out on the Phantom Galaxy podcast. You can find us on Podbean and iTunes. I'll put links below in the description of this video, and we'll talk to you next time.